You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
And welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Kevin Laramée joined by Mark Dailey. As always, Mark, it's been a crazy last couple of weeks. Austrian Grand Prix followed by the British Grand Prix with some news in the middle, with an F1 Live London event in the middle that Lewis Hamilton did not attend. That created some controversy as well. But quite busy last few weeks. So busy we actually missed the show between the two Grand Prix, so we missed the Austrian Grand Prix.
Yeah, the Formula One wasn't the only group of people that were busy. You and I were quite hectic in our own schedules and kind of made it kind of hard to connect. So I hate missing a show in between somewhere, but we're going to have a busy one tonight. So let's just get right at it. I guess we should, like you say, backtrack first of all and talk about Austria before we talk about some of the other news, and then also the British Grand Prix this last week. And then we get 1 week in between here, don't we, before the Hungarian Grand Prix, and then the one time of year that I dislike not quite as much as the winter, but almost as quite as much as the winter, and that's the Formula One summer break, which is coming up, because that means there's 3 weeks without any races, but then at the end of August, we get into the final portion of the season, starting with Spa and Monza and some of the great circuits on the Formula One calendar, but that's still a little ways off in the distance. So let's just go back to Austria, which was an interesting race last week, and I do admit I like them when they're back to back like this.
Yeah, no, the back-to-back makes it, especially when they're close by and they're those two classic circuits too, makes I wouldn't take like two road circuit in a row. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, because it's a lot of complication. It's a lot of cars turning in 90 degrees angle in a short amount of time. What I like about those two circuits, the Red Bull Ring, basically, and Silverstone, is both circuits are different, yes, but they're real circuits, right? They're built, designed, constructed for racing, and it makes for, I don't know if for better racing, but it makes for at least a viewing experience. Like, it's a pure racing viewing experience, right? It's what you're used to. You're watching, there's grass, there's curbs, there's nice long straightaways, high-speed turns. It's quite more enjoyable when I watch those type of races. When Montreal is like on the cusp, because it kind of looks like a full-time racetrack, and feels like racing, feels like Formula One. So I kind of say those two back-to-back races are one of my favorites outside of Montreal and maybe outside of the Circus of Monaco. And of course, the Hungaroring in 2 weeks is as well one of those tracks that are interesting, and they're the classic European tracks, right, where other series, other type of cars do race on them, and you do have like comparison, and you do have like a real race feel to them.
What I find so interesting about the Red Bull Ring is just how quick they were during qualifying. I think in Q3, they were getting down to about 1:04.5 thereabouts, or 1 minute 4 seconds. And it was coming down quite a bit. I think the fastest lap in the race was a couple of seconds slower at about 1 minute 7 seconds. But I think one of the shorter laps on the Formula One calendar, and then you take a look at that and compare that to Silverstone this past weekend, I think they were lapping at about 1:29 thereabouts in qualifying, and so in the low 1:30s for the race itself. But I do agree what you say is that when you have these tracks like these, it's nicer than say the road tracks, because you have a circuit that's designed to work with the terrain, with the land that's out there, rather than a road circuit that is kind of fitted to or manipulated to get the best configuration of corners and straightaways on a temporary track like that would be suitable for a Grand Prix race. But Silverstone is obviously one of the classics, and the Red Bull Ring, I do admit I quite like it, because it's got some nice twisty sections, and it's got some fast sections, and it's got that nice long, well, not really a long straightaway up into the first corner, but you definitely have that big change in elevation where they go into the first turn there, and that can make for some quite spectacular things. And, well, just ask Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso after they got acquainted.
The torpedo,
Yeah, the torpedo.
once again. Even in the Silverstone, the British Grand Prix, the torpedo was a factor. But you're right. Let's go back to the Red Bull Ring. Danny Kvyat. Let's start there. What do we do with him? Like, he's I think 3 points away from being like suspended. Like, he literally has 13 points on his license now, ducked this year, and the next round of points taken away, because they're like taking away 2 at a time every couple of months, is like next month. So he kind of has to lay low now, because he could be facing a suspension, disciplinary measure in a very near future.
And I don't recall if they've ever actually handed out a ban to anybody, at least not in recent memory. But Kvyat, and I'm just looking at a GIF I made of that first corner at Spielberg last week. And, well, Max obviously had that clutch problem, so he dropped back into the pack a little ways there because he was slow off of the line.
Yeah, terrible start.
Yeah, just happened.
But it wasn't his fault.
Slow.
It was a clutch problem, apparently, yeah.
No, because, he's on the outside of the track. Alonso's kind of in the middle of the track on that corner. And then you have Kvyat, who he locks up the brakes and then tries to sort of cut a little bit inside on Alonso, but still just hits him on the outside of the rear wheel. He becomes a passenger at that point, and he spins around and hits Verstappen. And at that point, it was just all over for both of them, which was unfortunate for Alonso. I mean, obviously, he didn't qualify near the top, but just with all the bad luck that he's had with McLaren this year, that maybe that was, not being a power circuit, that perhaps maybe there was an opportunity for him once again to maybe get some points out of that one. But unfortunately, he didn't make it out of the front corner. But yeah, it seems though, after what we saw this last weekend in Silverstone, that can the torpedo keep his nose clean? Well, you would think in normal situations or circumstances that if it was anybody else, you'd have to think, well, after you've had a couple of, incidents like that in recent races, that you'd be on your best behavior. But we've seen these things over the years with Kvyat. So I don't know. I really don't know, Kevin.
And in Austria, it cost Verstappen the race. And it cost Kvyat the race, if he did not finish, right? So...
yeah, he didn't make it to the end, did he?
No, I don't. I got because I got the British Grand Prix fresh in mind, right? So, but no, it was terrible performance by Kvyat, and it's been a few incidents now involving his teammates too. Not even involving Verstappen. So, what do you do? Like, if you're Red Bull, you already took him away from Red Bull last year to put him with Toro Rosso. So what do you do now? Do you just fire him? You just wait till the end of the year? Do you bring him back next year? Toro Rosso is supposed to be the step up kind of feeder team for Red Bull. So you're not necessarily keeping your drivers that long. You're not going to keep them for 5-6 years. So Sainz and Kvyat in the short-term future, maybe it will be there, but midterm, both I think will be gone at least in 2-3 years from now. So what do you do with Kvyat? Do you ride out the season and replace him in the offseason with whoever's possible in your feeder system? I think that the option for Dr. Helmut Marko, who's the Dr. Helmut Marko is in charge of the psychology and big decisions about the drivers, I think he's going to have a lot of hard thinking to do.
I agree. And then there's also these talks going around that Carlos Sainz is getting impatient and feels like he's destined for greater things in Formula One, and that he wants to move on to another team. But I really don't know where he's going to go, because I believe that they have both Ricciardo and Verstappen under contract at the big Red Bull team until 2019 at least. And, obviously, Mercedes is pretty much set. I mean, I know that there's still some discussion about whether or not that, Valtteri Bottas is going to be a lock for next year. But I mean, he's thrown himself into the championship conversation in the last couple of weeks. So you'd have to think that if there's anybody who's on the list to be back at Mercedes for next year, it would have to be it would have to be Valtteri Bottas that's at the top of the list right now. And Ferrari, that's going to be an interesting one, because we've sat here for the past year and a half wondering what's going to happen with Kimi Räikkönen, whether or not he should be there and how long he's going to be there for. Although this past weekend, we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes, but I felt bad for him the way that his tire went at the end, because he was quicker than Vettel all weekend long. But
yeah, but you know why the tire did that though? Because taking the curbs the way they do for the entire race.
Yes.
Eventually it's gonna put a kink in your suspension that it won't be able to get back from. It's literally what happened to him. It's different what happened to Vettel just the lap after. But what happened to Raikkonen yesterday at Silverstone is because of how he drove that car during the entirety of the race, is how he went up on the curb, so deeper in the curb where there's actually like little bumps made there to damage your car because they don't want you to go there. And that's what we've seen with the suspension of Raikkonen.
Well, also, since we've been talking about Austria as well, Max Verstappen was complaining before the days before the race that the curbs at Spielberg just aren't built for Formula One, which I think is kind of odd considering it's Red Bull's home circuit, and obviously it carries the name and
built for Formula One. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. When they redid the track and updated and everything like that, they basically built it the way that they wanted it. But it's true. I mean, some guys have had suspension problems, and I mean, obviously Magnussen had a suspension failure in qualifying. But it is tough on those tires and the suspension, and it just goes to show that although these cars are extremely tough and strong and very durable, that if you just treat them in a way that's a little bit outside of the design specs, that they actually can be quite the opposite. They can actually be quite fragile and quite delicate. And we've seen that a number of times, regardless if you're being torpedoed by Danny Kvyat or not, which, as you were talking there, I was just actually pulled up an article from motorsport.com, and this came out on Sunday. And I guess this must have been time-stamped before the race, because Danny Kvyat said that he wants an answer on his future with Toro Rosso as soon as possible. But Christian Horner was saying that he couldn't foresee a scenario why they wouldn't be working together in 2018, because they have an option for him for next year. But I guess that was all said and written before he took his teammate out, maybe. Which is about the biggest sin you can do in Formula One is cause an accident and take out your teammate. I think the only thing that'd be worse is take out your teammate and yourself. So
true, but you don't want to undermine his value, and It's always a poker game, right? It's public relations, and Christian Horner is very good to thread that line of he looks like he's open 100%, but he's keeping things from you, and whatever happens in the future, there's young Red Bull drivers in the up and up.
Of course, yeah.
So those might be a new team coming in F1 in a year or two. There might be other teams looking for a driver. Kvyat does have some value because of his experience, and he can be fast. That's not the problem. Problem is, doesn't mean he's going to finish the race, but he's pretty fast in qualifying sometimes. So he does have his upsides. So if you're a new team, or if you're a mid to last pack team and you kind of need a driver, Kvyat's there. Maybe Kvyat can be loaned to a Sauber next year because Verline might move on to whatever happens. That's a possibility. And then you free up a space at Toro Rosso for a young driver to come up and get experience. Carlos Sainz might stay there next year. So if you want that to happen, you still want to get the most out of your money, which would be Kvyat, so you don't necessarily want to undermine him. So I don't necessarily take this seamlessly vote of confidence. I don't necessarily put a lot of backing behind it, because I do feel that he's one more move away from, being suspended. And if that's the case, he has no job with Toro Rosso next year. It's been years since a driver has been suspended, and it happened, banned, we're saying, and it happened twice in the history of Formula One. So it happened to Schumacher once, if I'm not mistaken, in his early days with Benetton. And I think, I have no idea. I forgot the second one. But just to tell you, it's a long, long time ago.
Well, exactly. I mean, these things do happen, but I want to get back to what we were talking about with Valtteri Bottas, because I think that he's a very interesting guy at this point in time. And what we were talking about before we actually started recording is just how Bottas has inserted himself into the championship conversation now over the last couple of weeks. And I thought that the Austrian Grand Prix was a bit of a statement by Bottas, because Russia, I think, well, first of all, obviously, when he won the Russian Grand Prix at Sochi a couple of months ago, that was getting that weight off of his shoulders for that first win in Formula One, which I think he'd been, 85 Grand Prix before that. He finally got that first win. So, I mean, he did very well there. And it was almost in the closing stages a very, very similar situation. He had a good start in Russia, and he stayed at arm's length in front of the Ferraris. And then in the closing laps at Sochi, then of course Sebastian Vettel got very close to him, and then almost got within striking distance, and Felipe Massa just kind of got a little bit in the way, and really, I guess prevented Sebastian from really being able to make that move right at the worst possible moment. But again, at Austria, we saw the same thing. Bottas started from pole position, had an extremely good start, too good of a start. If you listen to the race radio of a lot of his rivals out there, I think both Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel questioned whether or not he jumped it. I think that the telemetry and the timing said that he was 0.201 seconds or something was his reaction time, but
he was on the threshold.
He
literally
was, yeah,
on the limit. And when you're almost in the same frame of HD TV broadcast, that the light goes on and your car's moving, that's insane. Like, yeah. So he's literally on the limit of human potential, like human reaction time, the literal time of almost speed of light, that then your eyes see what's going on, your optical nerve sends the information to your brain, you process the information and react accordingly with your hands. All that happened in 0.21 seconds, even less than that, because he started before and the entire sequence was literally engaged probably before the lights out. So it is impressive. It is on the limit of not cheating, but on just jumping the gun. And yes, you can say it's a skill that Bottas has of knowing how his car will launch, but still, he cut it pretty close, and he's like a thousandth of a second away from having a jump start.
Well, exactly. And I think that it was just a combination of everything. Good reaction times, very good anticipation, and also a little bit of luck, because if he just got that timing off a little bit, then yeah, he would have been penalized for it. But again, in the closing stages, it wasn't a very eventful race, and it was only in the last several laps again when Sebastian Vettel pressured Bottas, and he just couldn't get around him at the end there. But very much a similar situation that we saw in Russia. But it was fortunate for Vettel, because again, he didn't win the race, but he finished in front of Hamilton, who finished fourth after taking that grid penalty after qualifying in third, but then had the gearbox change, which dropped him down the order. But still, I mean, Hamilton, he did okay. I don't think that he really nailed it, as we've seen Hamilton do sometimes. It was obviously better than what he had to contend with in Monaco, when he didn't make it out of Q2, right? Where did he start that race? In like 13th or 14th position, right?
I don't remember what I did 3 days ago, Mark. So I have no clue off the top of my head what Monaco was. But no.
Yeah, it was. So I mean, it was a good recovery drive from Hamilton. Obviously, he would have liked to have get on the podium, but it was I think it was okay for him. But the thing is that with Vettel is that slowly over time, Hamilton has been whittling away at his championship lead. And Bottas has been quietly racking up the points and doing what I think a Mercedes driver should do. And I think that maybe in the first couple of races was maybe a little bit of an opportunity for Valtteri to get used to the car, get used to the team, and being with a contender. And I think for me, really, the only big mistake that he's made so far is when he spun out when they were behind the safety car in China. And I mean, after that, I mean, he's been pretty good. I mean, he did have that engine failure in Spain, but I mean, all in all, I think he's done pretty good so far.
No, I have to agree. And for me, it would be almost a no-brainer, quote unquote. That's what Toto Wolff said too. But he is assessing his other options for the future, for 2019 and so on. We know there's going to be a technological revolution kind of next year as well, and down the road as well in the 2024 or something. I believe it's already like ideas, and a lot of things will be different in the future in Formula One. So how much you want to commit? How much are you willing to go full length with a Bottas, with Lewis Hamilton performing great now and chomping at the bits, and 1 point behind as we speak after Silverstone to Vettel. So talking about very, very close Drivers' Championship, and well, close but not that close Constructors' Championship, which I see Mercedes going after quite easily the rest of the season. We're halfway there, right? We're 10 Grand Prix in now. It's 10 Grand Prix done. And what I have figured what would happen happened. They had reliability issues. And still might have some down the road. Wouldn't be surprised if we see another penalty maybe for Lewis Hamilton on the road. Same for Mercedes, because they only have, 5 engine and 5 motor generator unit for the entire year, and some of them are already at, majority of the team are already at 4, so it's not a problem that's going to be just for Lewis Hamilton's team, but for the entire grid down the road, it's going to be a problem. And it brings me to this. I'm sick of those penalties on the grid. Jeez, can you let the guys start where they qualified? Isn't that the whole point? Find another way to penalize the team or to cut costs in the amount that you're allowed, then making the grid different. Like, poor Fernando. Poor Fernando Alonso.
Well, that was just ridiculous, right? I mean, he had this fantastic qualifying session at Silverstone. I mean, he timed it to perfection.
First of Q1, that was insane. He by 1 second was allowed to start his hot lap. Then the session finished, and he pulled an amazing lap out of this god-awful McLaren Honda car. I say god-awful, that's the Honda part. That's the Honda part of the car. McLaren, the chassis is actually pretty decent. We've seen the difference here. He was able to take Beckett and other corners correctly and have that Q1 first position P1 time. It was awesome. People were going crazy. We knew he was not going to replicate it in the Q2 and Q3. We knew that. But, so awful that he didn't finish the race too. But that's what I mean. He started dead last and would have started 30 if there were 30 cars, because he had 30 penalty spots. It's unfair, I think, for the drivers, because what you really want to do is penalize the team, right? The entire reasoning behind those grid penalties is to limit the amount of gearbox, of engine, of MGUs, of drivetrain of those cars during the season to 5 or 10 or 20, depending on which parts we're talking about. And when that threshold is broken, you get a grid penalty. Or if you change one, whatever the reasoning, you get a penalty. What you actually do is you penalize more the driver than the car itself. So you penalize more the driver than the constructors. What if you apply a points that is only applicable on the Constructors' Championship side, and you keep your position that you qualified for? I don't know. What do you think, Mark? What would be other solutions? Because I do feel it's unfair to Fernando Alonso, to other drivers, because it keeps happening to Fernando. So that's why. But to Lewis, and it's going to happen to Vettel. It's going to happen to other cars down the road. And I think it's unfair.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea that they do have these cost-saving rules in place, but it's just the application of it. What is the way that makes it most fair, I guess, or makes the most sense to implement something like that? Because, like you say, it's not fair for a guy like Fernando Alonso, who's obviously struggling, and he puts in a great performance in Q1. Obviously, the conditions had a little bit to do with that. He managed to get the good tires on right at the very end and then just made it across the start finish line. But still, when it didn't matter what he could have done in that qualifying session. He could have set the fastest time in Q1, Q2, and Q3. He was still going to be starting from the back. But it's just ridiculous how these grid penalties add up, because remember what Lewis Hamilton did last year after the summer break. Remember when they went to Belgium, he went into the summer break after winning the German Grand Prix, and it looked like the championship was going a little bit in his favor, but he had all those mechanical problems earlier in the year, and he started way down in the order too, because they start to multiply when you change this component or that component. And I mean, we've seen several times throughout the years that guys get like a 50 place grid penalty. I mean, it becomes ridiculous. It's like you could start him at the back of 2 or 3 Formula One grids kind of lined up, after about 60 cars.
Well,
if you could get that
put
many
it there? That would be hilarious. Like, all right, you got a 30 grid penalty, so take your tape measurement, measure 200 meters from the back of the grid. That's where you start.
Yeah, but I mean, if you only have a grid of 20 or 22 cars and you're giving a guy a 50 grid penalty for all the engine and gearbox changes that he's made, at some point it just becomes a little bit ridiculous. It's like, what do you do when you get to that point that it's you can't go any further back on the grid? What do you do then? Yeah, deduct points, give them a time penalty at the end of the race, or there's different things. But I mean, if you're starting at the back of the grid, unless you're somebody, say like Danny Ricciardo, who was also unfortunate having that turbo problem in qualifying at Silverstone on the weekend and then starting one place in front of Fernando Alonso.
But they took advantage of it, though.
He did,
which is smart, because you're out of Q1, all right? So you start last anyways. So why not change other part of the car so that not for this race, but for the other races as well, you may be a little ahead in your performance and maybe more reliability. And God knows that the Red Bulls need all the reliability that they can get. So starting last, changing the drivetrain, I think they changed the gear of the car and other pieces. I think it was 5 grid penalties that he took after qualifying. So doesn't matter. He was going to start last anyways. And then you have like Alonso that has a 30 grid penalty. So you're still good. You're still going to be like starting 21st instead of 22nd.
Yeah, it's just, there's a bit of a difference too, depending who you are and where you end up on the grid. If you're starting on the very back row at the British Grand Prix, one of you's in a Red Bull and the other one's in a McLaren Honda. Well, I know which car I'd rather be in, and I know if I'm Danny Ricciardo, I'm knowing that if I get my pit strategy right and I can keep my nose clean, that, well, a podium's probably a little bit too much to hope for, but obviously a mid or high points finish is what you're going to be aiming for. And I think he did great to get all the way up to 5th position. Obviously, he had a little bit of help when Sebastian Vettel's tire blew right at the very end there. But I mean, even 6 would have been great for him, because he was going pretty good there. I mean, obviously, he went off of the track there at one point early in the race, which kind of messed things up, because I think at that point he was already up to 11th position. Then all of a sudden he dropped down half a dozen places again. But he really carved his way nicely through the pack. And I must admit, I was a little bit surprised how much time it took him to catch Nico Hülkenberg there at the end of the race. I thought he was going to catch him a lot quicker than he did. I mean, in the end, it was academic. I mean, he still managed to get around him, but kind of makes you wonder if he didn't drop down as far as he did after he had that off, and if he had maybe a little bit more fortune, would he have been able to maybe challenge his teammate Max Verstappen at the end of the race for 4th position? That might have been a little bit of a stretch, but I think if you're Danny Ricciardo, I think you have to be absolutely thrilled after 5 straight podiums, one of those being a win at Azerbaijan about a month ago. That 5th position after that disastrous Saturday was the perfect outcome to what looked like a really dire situation.
Yeah, no, and what I like about Silverstone is 70% of it is flat out. So with those, that's what they really like now with those cars, that they're really having fun at Silverstone, because I think Beckett before, which is the second of the sinuous S turns at Silverstone. Before it wasn't necessarily a flat out corner, and now it is with the downforce that those cars generate now. with those big tires, they're having a lot of fun at a circuit like Silverstone. And it showed, right? That Verstappen, let's talk about Silverstone. That Verstappen-Vettel dogfight. How awesome was that, Mark? How long has it been since you've seen a Red Bull and a Ferrari race like this? Literally maybe pushing each other a little bit off track, but fair. I think it was a fair battle, and I think it was great to see. And you only see this when drivers are confident in their cars and what they can do with them. And that's kind of what I really like now. We're 10 races in, and now they're finding the limits of the cars, and we're seeing every single team push the cars to their limits. That's why you have tires popping at the end of a race, not because the tires are not good enough. It's because you're trying to get every single ounce of performance out of your car. If you're a Mercedes, if you're Ferrari, if you're Red Bull, and that's kind of what you want to see. You don't want to see a team dominate so much that they can dial down their car to 90% and still win every single race easily and never have any trouble with reliability because their car is not even being pushed to its maximum. Now we're seeing every team needing to push to be able to get a result out of it. Drivers needing to be perfect. Example, on qualifying on Saturday, Mark, the difference between Vettel's lap and Hamilton's lap had nothing to do with the cars. Ferrari, with their statisticians, with their analytics people, they figured out that the car's output, performance output of both cars for Hamilton and Vettel on Saturday were pretty much equal. The difference was Hamilton's perfect lap at Silverstone. And that was the key difference. And I think that was the key difference on Sunday. And I think between Ferrari and Mercedes, but especially, you could say Bottas in now. So maybe it's between those two teams. And even Raikkonen did well in qualifying, right? Started at second. So I think the cars are pretty much equal. And we're seeing the drivers dictate the output and the results of those cars.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's going to be interesting, too, going through the second half of the season now to see how the balance of power has shifted. Is it a case of, like you were saying earlier, that Mercedes has caught up with Ferrari, or has it been a situation where Mercedes has caught up and gotten in front of Ferrari? Of course, they've had a couple of pretty good races, but I think that what we'll see is it'll be a good indication. Okay, well, let's see what happens in a couple of races now, say when we get to Monza at the beginning of September. Is that the case? Are they in front of them? Are they now quicker than Ferrari, or is it just a case that we know that Silverstone is a good track for Mercedes? Is that going to be the same thing at Hungary in a couple of weeks? Because Lewis Hamilton, not only has he won 5 British Grand Prix, 4 in a row, obviously, and he's tied with Alain Prost and Jim Clark for the record at the British Grand Prix, but he's also won at least 5 times in Hungary, so he's going to be licking his chops and waiting to go there, and maybe going into the summer break in 2 weeks ahead of Sebastian Vettel in the World Championship. So that's what I'm really interested in. That's the big question that I'm having right now is where is the parity between the two teams? And I think I do agree with you right now that I think that they're pretty much even, but it's going to be very interesting watching over the next couple of months.
Well, my theory that I had, and I've spoke on the show a few times, is the Mercedes was better than Ferrari all along, but it had a reliability problem. They had to dial down a bit the output of the engine. I do figure that the engine is better than the Ferrari one outright. The rest depends. Ferrari had more mechanical grip, and the Mercedes engine and cars were maybe better in theory and better built and a little bit more complicated, and they couldn't get the gear, the setup and the adjustments and quite the fine-tuning quite right. So it was kind of equal. The more they get to know this car, we'll see that the car is better than the Ferrari, and we'll see those results. I still feel Mercedes is quite easily the favorite to win the Drivers' Championship now, with Hamilton, and even maybe Bottas finishing second ahead of Vettel down the road, because I do feel that their cars will be that much better than the Ferrari because of the engine and because of, the design of the car was probably even better, but because of little complexity of the car, the adjustments and fine-tuning of the car is a bit more complicated, and it took a little while to maybe tame it. Once the car is tamed, they'll be even more successful. So no, I feel maybe that was the case all along, that the Mercedes was better, but it just wasn't necessarily getting the most out of the car. Ferrari had to go flat out all the time to try to get something out of the car, which they have a great car compared to all the other ones, but they still don't have a Mercedes engine.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. And I think, like you say, I think that Mercedes is really figuring out, because if you go back to Monaco, again, they're having those problems where they couldn't get the front and rear tires to work together at the same time to get into that optimal temperature range where they're both really working nicely and getting a lot of grip on the track at the same time. And they just couldn't get the car to work properly at that point in the season. And then a couple of weeks later, they went to Montreal. And at that point, they said that they'd spent basically 24/7 back at the factory at Brackley, and they'd figured it out, and they knew what they had to do at that point. And it's very much been a Mercedes story since then. Obviously, Lewis has turned his fortunes around in the World Championship, and I know that Baku was a bit of a different race a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, there was a lot of things going on that really switched that afternoon up. But it's going to be a very, very interesting. And I'm going to really be watching with a lot of interest in a couple of weeks to see exactly where the championship is when we go into the summer break. But at least when the summer break comes, at least we will still have things to talk about on this show, won't we?
Oh, for sure, Mark. But just before we go on to Formula E, one thing that happened too, just before Silverstone and just before F1 Live in London, was the British driver community, cooperative, whatever the name is, the organizing committee of the British Grand Prix of Silverstone had to trigger their pull out of their contract clause. And there's only 3 with the one that just happened, so there's 2 remaining in this existing contract, and they're going to have to either renegotiate or maybe there won't be a British Grand Prix. So there might be only 2018 and 2019 left at Silverstone for an F1 Grand Prix, Mark.
Which seems staggering, because to me that's one of those races that just has to happen every year. Last year there was talk that they would not be able to get a deal done to have a race at Monza, and that's, no Italian Grand Prix really blows my mind. And it's also very similar to the fact that there's no German Grand Prix this year. I mean, let's not talk about the fact that Hockenheim is completely different than the Hockenheim of old, but whatever. I mean, just the fact of that you have a German world champion driving, well, I mean, obviously Rosberg isn't driving this year, but he won the world championship in a German car with a German engine, and there isn't a German Grand Prix. And you just look at the history that German drivers and cars have had in Formula One, and to think that there isn't a Grand Prix there is just mind blowing. The same with a French Grand Prix. I mean, obviously they're coming back next year, but yeah, to think that Silverstone might be done in a couple of years is a little bit worrying, a little bit sad. So hopefully that this is just the first step in maybe the mechanics to renegotiate something for post 2019, and hopefully in 2020 they have a new deal in place, because I think, to me, it has to happen. And when they have a guy like Lewis Hamilton winning races, and you see him interacting with the crowd, and you see how the crowd is cheering, how everybody's into it, and how it's really a festival, how they really pack the circuit by hundreds of thousands of people, I think that those are the kind of things that Formula One needs. So I think all the parties need to get around the table together and hopefully work something out.
Yeah, no, I hope so, because it's always a great track to go to. It's a benchmark in the season too, because of the history of the track, the history of cars there too. It's a benchmark. You can evaluate properly the car there, and that's why I really was interested this year with the new cars. They're not that new now. It's 10 GPs in, but yeah. The fat tires, the more downforce, the little bit more agility, quote unquote, of those cars. Well, it was impressive. We had battles. We had overtakes. We had great battles. Maybe not for the lead, because Hamilton left everybody in his dust, and nobody saw him again for the rest of the entire race, except when he was passing you to lap you, because he actually lapped Vettel too. So, well, that's a statement.
Absolutely. And I think that some of the concerns that some of the drivers had before the season, that they weren't going to be able to pass each other this year, has just not completely proven to be true. I mean, maybe there's still room for improvement for more overtaking, but there haven't been too many races out there, I think, that have been completely boring. I mean, obviously there have been some situations where guys have sort of just disappeared down the road, but there's been plenty of overtaking and fighting in the pack, and I think that's great. And like you say, that situation between Vettel and Verstappen over the weekend was great as well, and it was also good watching Danny Ricciardo moving his way up through the field, and same with Valtteri Bottas. I thought Nico Hülkenberg had a great race, so plenty of good things to talk about.
Well, speaking of Hülkenberg, that's where I want to finish maybe our F1 portion of the show, Mark. Renault finally starting to show what I've been talking to you about. They had to literally restructure this team, right? They bought it, 2 years ago now, maybe it was? The full takeover of Renault from, I forgot who it was, Lotus before? Yeah, so it was Lotus.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the end of the 2015 season.
Yeah, so once they took over and they're starting to change the structure, add a lot of workforce, a lot of people, and develop pieces and develop new, maybe, floor and diffuser. And lo and behold, top 10 for Hülkenberg. Almost top 5, finished 6th, right? He almost could have held on to Ricciardo if it wasn't for little mistakes here and there at the end. But Renault is starting to show what they can do. It's starting to show that the engine is decent. We see it with Red Bull, right? Red Bull is clearly the third best team in the entire grid right now. And pretty much a good package they have with the Renault engine there. So we know the engine is good, and we're starting to see that, with the new floor, the new diffuser that Hülkenberg had, because he's getting the best of the upgrades because he's ahead in the World Drivers' Championship, would make sense. Poor Julian Palmer, by the way, who pulled an Alonso.
Poor guy.
He pulled a McLaren for Renault, not starting the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I mean, talk about poor guy, right? I mean, he's under pressure to keep his seat at Renault, and he gets a pretty good qualifying session. I mean, he just missed Q3. I mean, he started in 11th, and then to have the hydraulics go on the formation lap of all things is just, it's a real shame for the guy. I mean, you can't help but feel sorry for him considering everything that he's endured and all the criticism and the pressure. So, but I do agree. I think that things are finally going in the right direction for them with the car and the engine. Obviously, I think if you're Red Bull, you're going to want a little bit more power out of that power unit. But I think all in all, I think the signs are positive, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen with not only just the engine in both that Works car and also the Red Bull for 2018, but also how the Renault factory team is going to do and just where we can maybe see them improve for next year as well.
You're talking about signs. I'm going to talk about signs. The rumor right now is, if things doesn't turn around for Julian Palmer, he might get the boot mid-season, and they might get Carlos Sainz from Toro Rosso to be in the Renault mid-season, which means maybe during the break. That's a crazy rumor right now running rampant in the paddocks.
Well, we've seen it before. Last year at Manor Racing, they dumped, was it Rio Haryanto and replaced him with Esteban Ocon? Yeah.
Haryanto's money went dry.
It ran out, yeah.
So you're like, bye-bye. See you later, Rio.
That's what happens when you're a pay driver, right?
Yeah, when the check doesn't clear anymore, your ID card at the door doesn't go through. So one
your
morning
pass doesn't swipe anymore.
One morning you go to walk in the paddocks like, what? Keeps being red. Why can't I come in? What's happening? Now, all right, Mark. Let's take a quick little bumper break before we jump into our Formula E coverage. Formula E on Scuderia F1. Cheesiest bumper ever.
Hey, whatever works.
Whatever works. And, those cars do not work on gasoline. They work on electricity. And this weekend, Mark, in New York City, we had for the first time ever the New York ePrix. 2 days of racing close to the Statue of Liberty in the background and the river and the skyline. It was interesting, and it was quite interesting races too. A double DS Virgin Racing won both races, Bird as well. But what's interesting is because of the results of those two races, the championship is more contested. There's only 10 points difference now between Renault Idam Sébastien Buemi's car and the Audi Sports car of Lucas Di Grassi. Di Grassi was the first-time champion in the first year of the Formula E championship. Sébastien Buemi is the champion last 2 years, I believe. Sébastien Buemi is the favorite, but he only has 10 points heading into Montreal at the end of the month, July 29th and 30th, downtown Montreal. First ever Montreal ePrix, a Grand Prix zero emission. And that's one of the very cool factor about this series is it's not as unbreathable when you're close to the track. It's not as loud as well. It's more family oriented, and it's about technology. It's about the future. It's about the possibilities. There's a certain aura with this series and the traveling exhibitions that come with it, which are drones flying, which are technology in itself, which are like it's all created by the partners of Formula E, corporate partners. There's many of them. There's Qualcomm. There's Julius Baer, which is a Swiss private banking company. But Alliance, especially the German technology company, makes this series as a showcase for what automatic technology can do for the future, how e-houses and everything that artificial intelligence can do with like your refrigerator controlling to make sure that your milk doesn't go spoiled, all the little details like this, and they make it a showcase. Virtual reality. There's a virtual reality tent in Formula E when you're going for the fans and for the family to experience Formula E. So you kind of give the kids a idea of what the world's going to be like when they grow up and look at the future. And I like that about Formula E. Yes, cars are not going at 370 miles an hour. Talking about, kilometers an hour, sorry. Talking about 225. But still, the circuits are built in a way that are a little shorter, and you still get the same racing vibe. And racing is really close, and the cars are made to be able to race a little closer. So you do have dogfights all the time on the track, and it's a series that I'm getting to know more now by covering it and watching the races over the last few weeks. But I do like the fact that it's experienced drivers for the most part in this series, either experienced in Formula E since its beginning in 2014, or a lot of them are actually doing endurance racing too, and that's why next year the World Endurance Championship and Formula E will not compete. We'll have a schedule that does not hinder each other, so the drivers can do both, and that's a complement to being a complete driver. And we talk a lot about what Fernando Alonso's Triple Crown and all that he wants to achieve in the future, and I think Formula E will become a place where great drivers want to be able to achieve themselves in a different way. It's managing energy differently than managing gasoline. There's a different mentality, philosophy behind how you manage your car. And starting next year, there's going to be new partners, new manufacturers, a lot more logistics made easy for the teams because they won't have to change cars mid-race next year. They're going to have a battery that's capable of during the entirety of the race. So a lot of progress are going to happen in the future with this series. It is unequivocally right now the fastest growing open wheel series in the entire world, and it's the series for the future. And I have to say, well, you can probably tell, I'm really pumped to attend it in the next 2 weeks.
It's also very interesting, too, because I was watching that documentary on Netflix, and I can't remember what it's called for the life of me at the moment, but it's the one about these electric motorcycle manufacturers that were doing the Isle of Man TT. And the documentary is now several years old, so obviously the technology in these electric racing vehicles, it doesn't matter if it's a car, motorcycle, whatever, but it's just how quickly it's evolving and changing. And I think that very much it's just getting to the point where the batteries are smaller, they've got more power that they can deliver, and they're also not quite as heavy, because I can't remember some of the specs that they had for the battery packs that they had in some of these motorcycles, but they were at that point very, very heavy. But of course, you look at other things too. I mean, you look at just where, say, cell phone technology has gone over the past 10 years or 20 years. I mean, you look at some of the cell phones that you had like in the 1990s and how big the battery packs were on them now and how heavy the phones were and bulky and everything. And you look at, say, your iPhone, your Samsung Galaxy right now, it's just like how miniaturized and how much more capable things are. And I think that's what's interesting about Formula E as well, is just how quickly the technology is evolving. Like you say, next year, you won't be having to switch the cars in the mid-race. And I think that's really cool. And it's interesting, too, when you see some of the big manufacturers, some of the big companies that are getting involved, and some of the names that are in the series now in one capacity or another. So it's going to be very fascinating to watch and see how it goes. I mean, especially you look, they're only in their third full season now after 2014, right? Yep. And just how quickly it's just gone over that course of 15, just a couple of years.
It was announced. It was like created in 2014. Yes. But you're right, no, it's third season. So you're right. It's 15, 16, and 2017 is the third season. That's going to finish in Montreal with another doubleheader after Berlin, New York, Montreal on July 29th and 30th. And it's quite a handful too, Mark. Yeah, you have to be quite in shape even as a motor racing fan, because it starts at 7:30 in the morning with practice 1, then practice 2, then qualifying, then race 1. And that's just day 1. Starts all over again the next day for day 2. It's a full day worth of racing, and tickets starts as low as $32 for a general admission, so it's quite affordable too. And it's made to be close to it too, so it's not as loud. It's a different sound. So if you're a gearhead that really drives on the big noise of the engine, this might not be your cup of tea, but it is racing. Even if there's no gasoline involved, it doesn't matter. It is racing, maybe not necessarily racing for the future. Maybe that's an hyperbole. But I do feel that to drive technology forward, well, you need a reason for it. What's the expression? Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, if we want to truly find a way to create electric cars that are performant and are cost-effective and reliable, well, you have to push the technology, push how you would build an electric car. You have to push the limits of it. And racing is one of the ways where you push and design. You push designs of electric car to its full potential and further, and try things. And sometimes you fail, and you fail 1,000 times, but you figure out a way, and you create a new technology. And lo and behold, 10 years on the road, it trickled down, and it helped create general electric cars for everybody. You know, that's the possibilities, right? That's the idea. That's the utopian idea behind this type of series, is maybe we can help mankind on this basically in this case, because more electric cars mean less gasoline cars, which hopefully means maybe better air that we breathe one day.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it's funny. I was thinking just as you were talking about, if you're a gearhead and you like the sound and the smell and all that sort of stuff that you get with normal engines. I remember the first Grand Prix I went to was the 2001 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. And I remember when we were walking into the circuit on the very first day for practice or qualifying, whatever it was, how they were handing out earplugs at the gate. And, you kind of put them in your ears, but, when you only get a couple of cars going around at the time, it's the loudness of the engines wasn't all that much. And I remember when the race started on Sunday afternoon, how we were sitting at the bottom of the track where the big hairpin is there. And it's a great place to watch at the Nürburgring. But when the whole grid came down the hill there through those couple of corners into the hairpin, they went by. I couldn't believe the noise, because you're just sitting there. I went with about 6 or 8 friends of mine, and you're sort of sitting there chatting and fooling around in the grandstands and having a good time. So you don't want to have your earplugs in too soon. And then I just kind of forgot about them, and the noise was incredible. And then fast forward to the last race I went to was the 2014 Spanish Grand Prix, and that was of course with the new hybrid V6 turbos. And we had earplugs, and I don't think I put them in the entire weekend I was there. And I must admit that I do miss the sound. And although these new engines in Formula One are brilliant and fascinating technology, I must admit it was a little bit underwhelming. You kind of have that sort of sound in your mind as what a Formula One car should sound like.
That sound equivalates like air burning. Like it equivalates like literally the earth getting warmer. So maybe we think we can make a little sacrifice, and going like, I wouldn't be surprised down the road, Mark, like maybe 10 years from now, if Formula 1 and Formula E are not necessarily one and the same, not saying that they'll be the same, but saying that maybe Formula E is the feeder for Formula 1 that would be maybe fully electric by then. Because just look at what car manufacturers are slowly turning themselves to be. Volvo announced that right now, in the very short-term future, they're going to turn 50% of their production to fully electric cars. And are expecting to, down the road, a few years down the road, I think it was 10 years down the road, to have produced 100% just electric cars. So if a manufacturer like Volvo is open with those projects and talking like this, you have other manufacturers down the road that are going to probably go on the same route. And once a few of them goes down to being electric cars only and be profitable and maybe better for everybody, other companies are going to follow suit, because you either follow or you're obsolete. Just ask, what is it, Kodak? That doesn't exist anymore? Whatever. Polaroid still exists, and it's actually popular. But Kodak doesn't exist anymore. They don't even produce films anymore. And they never adjusted to digital camera. So if you don't want that to happen, eventually you need to change. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe down the road, manufacturers themselves, like Mercedes, like Ferrari, like Renault, would put pressure on FIA and Formula 1 to be like, you know what? Maybe we need to go with the times and in 2030 or 2035 be fully electric.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder where it's going to end up eventually, because at some point,
solar,
this electric
F1 solar, why not?
Yeah, who knows, right? At some point, there is going to be that tipping point, and it's going to be, like you say, on the roadside of production will be more and more electric to fully electric at some point in the future. And where that tipping point is or has been, that's a good question. And how that translates into racing is going to be a very good question as well, because there was that talk over the off season that about like a return to the V10s or the V8s, and a lot of people were I think they missed the sound, but they didn't necessarily want to go back to that old type of technology just because, right? It's an interesting situation because people are aware of the broader implications. Yeah. And it's more of a question than, I mean, the car sounded great in those days, but you got to move along with the times, right?
Yep, exactly. And just to go back to the New York ePrix, Nick Heidfeld made it on the podium around the 10th race, so the second day. Former driver in Formula 1, now driving for Mahindra Racing, which Mahindra is one of the brands that used to have a few different series they'd be driving in. Well, they were in Formula 1 in the past. They were in Formula E, and they were doing as well some rally racing, I believe. Now they have closed up all other series and are focusing all their resources on Formula E. What really interests me as well is the Constructors' Championship, right? Because the beginning, this was a series where everybody had the same car, and it was literally the drivers making the difference. And that's in 2015. In 2016, they had even more liberties now. Renault and other teams were able to develop their own drivetrain, which what makes the actual power of the car, right? Because there's no combustion engine. It's an electric car. So how it works is you have the battery, you transfer the battery to a generator of some sort that's connected to a drivetrain. So that creates the movement, and the drivetrain creates the movement of the wheel. So it's how you create that drivetrain, how you efficiently get power out of the battery to your wheels that makes this car better than others. So after year one, teams were able to develop, and next year they'll be able to develop even more parts of this. Cars more implicated into the development of the cars as well. Next year it's going to be a different chassis made by Spark. I mean, Spark will create another chassis next year for the new batteries as well. But Renault, Audi, Mahindra, Virgin Racing, and NextDev, Techeetah, those are the top 6 teams. But it's all about Renault and Audi. Yes, the Constructors' Championship is out of hand. It's $259 for Renault Idams and $194 for Audi. The thing is, on the driver's side, Mark, Buemi $157, and he drives for Renault. And you have Lucas Di Grassi, second, $147. So that's where it's going to be interesting. Montreal will decide who wins the championship, and that's all we wanted. Montreal was named the deciding host of this year's series, and we wanted a close championship that we can see unfold in front of us in the streets of Montreal. And we will have this happen because the last two races, Buemi did not score any points at all. Lucas di Grassi 12 and 10. Buemi had, unfortunately, was doing some endurance racing at the same time, so he missed races. So Lucas di Grassi took advantage of it and scored 12 points and 10 points in New York, which brings him only 10 away from Sebastian Buemi, and it's going to be all decided in the street of Montreal. So Renault and Audi are battling for the Drivers' Championship at the end of the month.
Well, it doesn't get any better than that. And as we've seen over the last couple of years in Formula One, with the title coming down to the very last race of the year at Abu Dhabi, there's nothing like it to have it literally come down to the final few corners of the very last race of the season. So it should be a good one.
It's really, really going to be one. All right, Mike, I think it's about time we wrap this up for this week. You can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramée and follow every show we do at SportsPod.net and available on demand, iTunes, Google Play Store, anywhere you get your podcasts. Just look for the Sports Podcasting Network.
And of course, you can follow this show on Twitter at Scuderia F1. And, well, actually, I'm incorrect, at Scuderia F1 Pod. There, it's been a couple of weeks since I've said that. I almost forgot our own Twitter handle. Anyways, on behalf of myself and Kevin Laramée, thank you very much for listening. And we look forward to catching up to you again this time next week.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.